In statistics, usually we want to make a conclusion to the population, but we start from a sample, so we need to know some common sampling method. The first is called convenient sampling. We just ask whoever is around. For example, if you want to know which basketball will win, you just ask around the stadium, then you get the conclusion. The weakness of this method is bias exists. Opinions are limited to individuals present. The next method is called voluntary response sampling, often called public opinion polls. These are not considered valid or scientific because different people are motivated to respond or not. For example, if I belong to one party, although I think the other party will win, but when you ask me, I can choose don't respond. So that gives us some like bias also. The next method is called probability or random sampling. Individuals are randomly selected. No one group should be overrepresented. The strength of a sampling probability or random sampling is we can get rid of bias. A typical method is called a simple random sample. For short, just SRS, is made of randomly selected individuals. Each individual in the population has the same probability of being in the sample. And all possible samples of size n have the same chance of being joined. Another typical sampling method is called stratified sample. A stratified random sample is essentially a series of simple random samples performed on subgroups of a given population. The subgroups are chosen to contain all the individuals with a certain characteristic. For example, we can divide the population of USM student into male student and female student. Or we can divide the population of California by major ethnic groups. The simple random sample taken within each group in a stratified random sample need not to be of the same size. For example, in USM, we divide the population into males and females, and in the males, we can choose a sample of size 100. And in the females sample, we can choose the size as 150. So 100 and 150. These two not necessary to be the same. Another example is, for example, if we want to stratify the random sample of 100 Californians, they can be chosen with representing proportionately the major ethnic groups. Again, not necessarily the same size. The other type is called a multi-stage sample. Usually use multiple stages of stratification. When we do the sampling service, we need to be cautious about several points. The first one, some people may choose to not respond. So people who feel they have something to hide or who don't like their privacy being invaded probably won't answer. But sometimes we need to consider this, the effect of this because they are part of the population. The second is response bias. If you have some fancy word, fancy terms for lying when you think you should not tell the truth or forget it. For example, how much do you drink? So usually, for example, even I drink 10, I will choose, I said drink 5. Because I may think the drink is not a good thing. So this is particularly important when the questions are very personal. When you design the survey, you need to be careful with the wording effect. Questions worded like, do you agree that it is awful that something? this word awful here may give the people some hints. So they may respond differently if you choose different word. So you need to be very careful when we design this survey questionnaire. The next point is under coverage. Occurs when part of the population are left out in the process of choosing the sample. So you just forget somebody, and in the sample you forget to choose some from this subgroup. So this is called under coverage. And this sampling method sometimes can sell or can solve some problems, right? So one very typical is called capture and recapture sampling. Repeated sampling can be used to estimate the size of the population, capital N. Example is, what is the number of bird species, for example, flycatcher, migrating along a major route? These two flycatchers are called, what we do is we catch this bird in net and tag them, then release them. And the next year, we catch some bird again, and we count the number of tagged. Then we record the number of in the next year, we record the total number we catch and the number of birds that are tagged. From these two numbers, then we can find these three numbers. We can find estimate the total bird population. For example, in the first year, we catch 200 birds. We catch them, then we tag all these 200 birds, then we release them. And the next year, we catch another batch of birds, and the total sample size is 120. We count them, and we found that there are 12 of these 120 that are tagged. So once we are given these three numbers, we can estimate the total bird population. Because in the second year, the tagged birds is only 10% of the total. So we assume in the first year, the 200 bird is also only 10% of the total population. So that means the total population is supposed to be 2,000. This works well if both samples are simple random sample from the population. Both samples, in the first year, we randomly choose 200 birds to be tagged to be released. So that's the first simple random sample. The second year, we choose another simple random sample, and here the size equals 120. And we want to keep this population to be unchanged. Sometimes in practice, the population will change. For example, some bird will die, some bird will fly outside the region, won't come back but anyway, there are some other reasons. But if we design the experiment carefully, and this estimation is still relatively accurate. All these experiments will deal with human beings or animals. So we need to follow some ethics point. First one is the institutional review board. If you want to make an experiment, for example, if you work for biology, chemistry, or even psychology, you want to use a human being or animals to test your hypothesis. You want to do design some experiment. The first step is you apply to the institutional review board. For example, USM, we have the institutional board. And in I, with someone else in kinesiology, want to test some with basketball performance. And before we design the experiment, we need to apply for permission from the institutional research board. The organization that carries out the study must have an institutional review board, USM has one, that reviews all planned studies in advance before you do the experiment in order to protect the subject from a possible harm. For example, we want to take some videos of basketball players, and we need to report, we need to apply to the institutional review board, tell them what we are going to do and how we are going to use those data. And if they said yes, then we can proceed, otherwise we cannot. The purpose for the institutional review board is to protect the right and welfare of a human subject, including patient, recruited to participate in the research activity. The institutional review board, after review your proposal, they may need to review they review the plan of studies, they can require changes, and they can review the consent form. The consent form is a form that needs to be signed by the individual, the subject. And also, the institutional review board can monitor the progress at least once a year. For example, in USM, if you want to design this kind of experiment, you already need like about 1 month or a little bit shorter to prove. So if you want to do this kind of experiment, you need to plan earlier. Next point is informed consent. As we said, all the subjects need to give their informed consent before the data can be collected. Subject must be informed in advance about the nature of the study, so what we are doing, what's the purpose, and any risk of harm it might bring. I tell you, for example, I just take a picture of you. So you may say, okay, there's no physical harm to me, but this picture may be posted on the website or something that you may don't like this. So anyway, so I need to tell you exactly what exactly will happen in the study. So subject must then consent in writing. You need to sign the form. But some people cannot give informed consent. That means if you even get the consent from these people, that's not valid. Examples include the prison inmates, very young children. If the kids are very little, then you already need to be accompanied by their parents, and the parents can sign for them. People with mental disorders, that's obvious. Confidentiality is also important. All individual data must be kept confidential. Only statistical summaries may be made public. That means there's no names or personal information. Confidentiality is not the same as anonymity. Anonymity prevents follow-ups to improve non-response or inform subject of the result. For example, if somebody wants to study, is there any relationship between the GPA in the university with the success of later lives? If you want to find is there any relationship between these two, then, for example, you take the result of your GPA in the university, then like after 10 years, after 20 years, 30 years, you want to quantify how success that subject is. In this case, you need to have, you cannot have the subject anonymous because you need to follow up. But you still need to keep this information confidential. So that's the difference between confidential and anonymous. Once you get this data, you need to separate the identity of the subject from the rest of the data immediately. Example, citizens are required to give information to the government in tax returns, social security contributions, and so on. Some people feel that individuals should be able to forbid any other uses of their data, even with all identification removed. So there's a lot of things related to this confidentiality. For example, now is tax season. You need to file for tax. Your tax forms, for example, you submit your tax form to some lawyer to help you to do accountant to do this. Then sometimes like 30%, 50%, maybe even more. I forget the numbers, but maybe 50% of the U.S. Tax forms are not processed in U.S. Actually, it's in India. Right? And before the U.S. company send the tax forms to India, they need to remove the identities. For example, your names, your social security number, and maybe your address. And they only send out the numbers. Right? Then they process feedback. Then they connected, put all that information back. Then they can help you to file the tax. So this is a very serious problem because you do not want your personal information leaked to the world. If your experiment is related to clinical, this is also, we need to follow some rules. Clinical trials study the effectiveness of medical treatment on actual patient. This treatment can harm as well as heal. Because usually, for example, the treatment is a new method, the drugs are new, we don't know they are harmless or not. For this kind of experiment, points for discussion. First one, randomization. We need to randomize comparative experiment are the only way to see the true effect of the new treatment. So when you design this kind of experiment, keep this in mind. Randomization is the most important. And most benefit of clinical trials go to the future patient because you said, okay, this drug is beneficial, but with some like side effect. Then if we are going to improve the side effect, then will benefit the future patient, but not the current subject. So we must balance the future benefit against the present risks. The interest of the subject must always prevail over the interest of the science and society. Sometimes I'm very interested, okay, not only me, the science and the society are very interested in something, right, some knowledge. For example, what is the radiation level that will give human being a harm? We know the cell phone has a radiation, the radars and all these transmitters, high power transmitters have radiated power, and they may harm the human being. So what kind of level is safe? What kind of level is harmful? And we want to know this. Now, in this experiment, the subject will be exposed to the harmness. So, in this kind of experiment, you need to be careful. The interest of the subject must always prevail over the interest of the society or the science. One famous example is in the 1930s, the Public Health Service recruited 399 poor blacks with syphilis and 201 without the disease in order to observe how syphilis progressed without treatment. So here the key is without treatment. We know this group has that disease, but they do not treat them. They didn't give them treatment. They just observe what happened next. And this one lasted very long, starting from the 1930s until 1970s. Once this, the public knows this experiment, then they just stopped. So this is not good because it's not ethical. The reason is obvious, because they know they have disease, they just decided to not give them any treatment. Next point is it's very important for like psychology or social science. If you do want to perform some experiment in this field, when you design the experiment, you need to hide the true purpose of the study, especially when you design the questionnaire. Subject would change their behavior if told in advance what investigators were looking for. So you need, when you design the questionnaire, you need to be very careful. There are a lot of techniques to do this. The ethical principle of the American Psychological Association requires consent unless a study merely observes behavior in the public place. In a public place. In this case, we do not need any consent. Otherwise, we need. Okay, so this is the end of this chapter.